let's just jump right in. When you hear that word karma, what pops into your head? Some kind of cosmic scoreboard? A system of rewards and punishments for being good or bad? Well, for today, we're going to take that whole idea and just set it on a shelf. We're going to look at karma from a totally different angle, not as morality, but as pure mechanics. On this image, this really gets to the heart of it. Instead of beating ourselves up over our negative thoughts and feelings, seeing them as some kind of personal failure, what if we could see them as just predictable, conditioned processes, like gears just turning in a really complex machine? Because if you can see the gears, well, then you can start to understand how to disengage them. This ancient quote from the Dhammapada really sets the stage. See, the goal isn't just to be good for the sake of it. The goal is to be free. And these three things, greed, hatred, and delusion, they aren't just moral failings. They're the very chains that keep the mind locked up. So let's start by totally reframing this concept. We're officially leaving the courtroom and heading straight into the laboratory. Okay, here's the big shift in thinking. I want you to imagine yourself not as a sinner on trial, but as a physician observing a patient. The unwholesome states that pop up in your mind, they're like pathogens. I mean, you don't judge a virus for being a virus, right? No! You identify it, you understand how it operates, and then you can figure out how to treat it. Our task is to become diagnosticians of our own minds. Now for a little bit of mental forensics. If karma is a process, a mechanical thing, then when exactly does the karmic event happen? At what precise split-second moment is a new cause actually set into motion? Okay, so take a look at this simplified breakdown of how we process things. It all starts with sensation, you see something, and then recognition, you know what it is. But the real action, the moment the karma is actually created, happens right there at step 3, impulsion. The Pali word is javana. You can think of it as a mental lunge. It's that instant you decide to pull something closer or push it away. And this is the absolute key insight. Karma isn't the feeling that first arises. It's the willed reaction to that feeling. So what's fueling that mental lunge? What's behind that moment of impulsion? Well, it all boils down to 3 fundamental drivers. These are the root defilements of the mind. First up, there's greed, or lobha. And look, this isn't just about wanting money or a fancy car. It's the most basic mental gesture of attachment, that feeling of trying to pull an experience, a sensation, or an object toward you and just hold on tight. And the exact opposite movement is hatred, or desha. This is the energy of aversion, of rejection, of aggression. It's that mental gesture of wanting to push an unpleasant experience, or a person, or a feeling, just get it away from you. And the one that underpins them both, the one that makes them possible in the first place, is delusion, or moha. Think of it like a fog bank rolling in. It's that background confusion, that basic ignorance of how things really are, that allows greed and hatred to sprout. It's just not seeing things clearly. Okay, so with those 3 roots in mind, let's crack open our diagnostic manual. There's this incredibly detailed framework in Buddhist psychology called the Abhidhamma, and it maps out 12 specific types of unwholesome consciousness that spring from these roots. So let's explore them. Now, greed is actually the most complex of the 3. It branches out into 8 distinct states. And to tell them apart, we just ask 3 diagnostic questions. First, what's the feeling? Was the act joyful, or was it kind of emotionally flat, neutral? Second, what's the view? Did you rationalize what you did, tell yourself it was okay, or did you kind of know it was wrong? And third, what was the prompting? Was it spontaneous, or did someone else have to nudge you or encourage you? And here they are. This table maps out all 8 of those subtle flavors of greed. What's so fascinating here are the archetypes, right? They give each of these abstract states a real personality. And pay close attention to that right view column. That little asterisk is super important. It means you are fully aware that the act is unwholesome, but you go ahead and do it anyway. For instance, look at type 1, the delighted, ignorant child, who acts spontaneously with joy and totally justifies it. Now contrast that with type 3, the thrill-seeking thief. They also act with joy, but they know what they're doing is wrong. See, this isn't just one blanket feeling, it's a whole spectrum. Let's look at a couple more examples to make this really concrete. So let's zoom in on state number 3, our thrill-seeking thief. Here, the feeling is joyful, and the act is totally spontaneous. But notice, it's connected with right view. This means the thief knows picking a pocket is wrong, but the thrill, that jolt of joy, just completely overpowers that knowledge. They're not trying to justify it. They're just acting on that powerful impulse. Now contrast that with the vibe of number 7. Here the feeling is neutral. There's no joy. This is the addict acting out of sheer compulsive habit. There's no pleasure left, only that raw, spontaneous force of craving, even while knowing full well that the act is self-destructive. Being able to see this distinction is an incredibly powerful diagnostic tool. Okay, so the states rooted in hatred, they're actually much simpler. Unlike some of the greed states, these are never accompanied by pleasure. They are always experienced as suffering. And they basically come in 2 main forms. You've got that spontaneous, unprompted flash of rage, and then you have the prompted, slow-burning resentment that you consciously build up and nurture over time. And this quote from Seneca just nails it, doesn't it? It perfectly illustrates why hatred is always experienced as displeasure. He knew it centuries ago. The feeling itself is the poison. It damages the mind that's holding it long before it ever affects anyone else. And finally, we've got the 2 states where delusion is really running the show. The first one is this kind of deep-seated doubt that just paralyzes you, prevents you from committing to anything. And the second one is that all too familiar, agitated restlessness, the monkey mind that jumps from thought to thought to thought, completely unable to settle. Now, while these might create weaker karmic imprints than, say, intense rage, they're often the most stubborn and frustrating obstacles we face. So, what's the point of all this? How do we actually use this diagnostic manual in our daily lives? It all comes down to one fundamental, really alchemical shift in perspective. This slide right here, this is everything. The untrained mind immediately identifies with the feeling, I am angry. It becomes your identity in that moment. But the alchemist, the diagnostician, takes a step back. They see it impersonally. A specific mental state has arisen, it has these characteristics, it appears to be rooted in hatred. So the whole point, the crucial takeaway, is this. The purpose of this entire manual is not to make you feel guilty. It's to give you the clarity to recognize these states for exactly what they are. Temporary, conditioned events just passing through your awareness. And when you stop identifying with them, when you stop saying, I am this, they lose their power over you. You see the gear turning and you stop feeding it fuel. You know, this isn't just an interesting theory. It's a practice. It's something to actually do. So the real question I want to leave you with is this. As you go about your day, which one of these gears, which one of these states will you be able to spot turning in your own mind? Because that simple act of noticing, that's the beginning of freedom.
You know, we all want to be good people. We do acts of kindness. We try to be generous, and we hope that leads to good things, right? But what if all that goodness, all that wholesome karma, was just another kind of trap? A beautiful prison for sure, but a prison nonetheless. Okay, let's really dive into this, because the nature of virtue is way more complex and, frankly, more fascinating than it seems. And look, the ancient texts, they celebrate virtue with beautiful poetry just like this. The idea is that goodness has this power, this fragrance that spreads everywhere, no matter what. It's a really inspiring thought, and it's kind of the foundation of most ethical systems, isn't it? Be good, and good will follow. Simple. And boom, here it is, the central paradox we're going to unpack today. This is the uncomfortable question that completely flips the script on the whole spiritual path. What if the very act of being good, in the way we usually think about it, is just another way of staying stuck in the exact same cycle we're trying so hard to escape? So think about it like this. This metaphor is just brilliant. Unwholesome karma, actions coming from greed or anger, that's like an iron chain. It's heavy, it's ugly, it causes very obvious suffering. We get that. But wholesome karma, actions from generosity and kindness, that's a golden chain. It's beautiful, it feels good. But notice the most important part here. It's still a chain. Both of them bind you to the cycle.
Okay, so if we're going to figure out how to break free, we first need to get what this golden chain is even made of. Let's take a good deed and, well, let's pull it apart and see what's going on inside. Because it's definitely not as simple as good versus bad.
So according to this analysis, any wholesome act has basically 3 key ingredients. First, the feeling. Were you feeling joyful when you did it, or was it more of a calm, neutral vibe? Second, wisdom. Did you do it with a real understanding of how karma works, or was it kind of mindless? And third, prompting. Did you just do it spontaneously, or did you have to kind of nudge yourself to do it?
Now, when you start mixing these 3 factors, you don't just get good. You get a whole spectrum of goodness, with 8 totally distinct types of wholesome consciousness. So let's look at a couple of examples to see how this plays out in the real world.
So, here we have the absolute gold standard of mundane wholesome action. This is the one with all the best ingredients. You feel genuinely happy doing it, you get why you're doing it on a really deep level, and it just flows out of you naturally, no hesitation at all.
So imagine this. You see someone who needs help, and you just help them, spontaneously, and you feel this rush of joy. But here's the game changer, the wisdom part. It means you're not doing it to get a pat on the back or to feel like some big hero. You're doing it with this clear insight that there's no permanent me getting a reward. It's just a good cause creating a good effect. That little shift makes the action incredibly powerful. Now, just for contrast, let's jump to the other side of things and look at a type of good deed that's probably a lot more common for most of us. Here, the action is still spontaneous, but the feeling is pretty neutral, and it's done without any real deep thought.
I mean, this is the classic example, right? You hold the door for someone, it's just a habit, it's polite, it's wholesome, and it's absolutely not a bad thing. But it's not on autopilot. It's a nice habit for sure, but it doesn't really do much to sharpen your insight or change your fundamental view of reality.
And this chart here gives you a little snapshot of that spectrum. We just talked about type 1, that lucid generosity, and type 7, just habitual politeness. But look at the others. You've got type 3, that's pure instinctive kindness. It feels joyful, but it's dissociated from deep wisdom. It's all heart. Now compare that to type 5, a calm, principled duty. It's not bursting with joy, but it's associated with a clear, moral understanding. It's all head. You can really start to see how every good deed has its own unique flavor.
Okay, so we've mapped out all these different ways to be good. But now we get to the real pivot point of this whole explainer, the most crucial question. Why isn't even the best of these, that amazing type 1 action, the final goal?
So here's the bottom line. Every single time you perform a wholesome act, you are planting a seed for a future result. You're basically booking a reservation for a nice experience down the line, a happy state of mind, maybe a better rebirth. But you're still making a reservation. You are still playing the game, participating in the very system that keeps you trapped in time, going around and around.
So if piling up good karma isn't the way to true freedom, then what in the world is? Well, this brings us to a completely different category of action. The kind that's performed by an arahant, a fully enlightened being who has already snapped the chains.
This metaphor is just perfect. The actions of an arahant are called functional consciousness. Now, on the outside, they might look exactly the same as our type 1 wholesome action. They're compassionate, wise, spontaneous. But inside, the engine is totally different. Because the delusion of a self who is doing the action is completely gone, the act leaves zero karmic residue. It's perfect, and then it vanishes, leaving no track behind.
And this table just lays it out so clearly. For most of us, a wholesome action is based on this subtle little idea of, hey, I am doing a good thing, so it plants a karmic seed. But a functional action is based on the wisdom of emptiness. There is no doer. It doesn't plant a seed at all. It's like writing on water. The moment the action is done, the surface is smooth again. The difference is everything.
So what does this mean for us, practically speaking? If the goal isn't just to anxiously collect virtue points, what is the actual work we're supposed to be doing to find that freedom?
And this is the great takeaway. The path is not about adding things to yourself. It's not about building up some kind of virtuous personality. It's about subtraction. Kindness, clarity, wisdom, these are the mind's natural state. They're what's left when you finally get all the junk out of the way.
I love this final metaphor because it's so simple and so practical. Your job is not to force the flowers of virtue to bloom. The real work, the hard work, is to just diligently identify and pull out the weeds, the greed, the hatred, the delusion in your own mind. When the garden is clear, the flowers grow all by themselves. So, I'll just leave you with this final thought to chew on. Maybe instead of focusing so much on how to be a good person, the more liberating question to ask yourself is this: what weeds in your own mind might be keeping the flowers from growing?
Have you ever just stopped and wondered what a thought actually is? I don't mean the content, like what's for dinner, but the actual machinery behind it. You know, how does a simple sight or sound suddenly trigger a whole cascade of feelings and memories? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain. We're going to deconstruct a single thought, moment by moment, using this incredible model from Buddhist psychology called the cognitive series. You know, we usually experience our own consciousness as this smooth, continuous thing, right? Like a river. One thought just seems to flow into the next. Perceptions blend together. It all feels totally seamless. But what if I told you that entire feeling of continuity is an illusion? The model we're exploring today flips that idea on its head. Instead of a river, I want you to picture your mind like an old-school movie projector. It's not a continuous flow. It's a super fast sequence of individual static frames that, when you play them at high speed, create the illusion of smooth, continuous motion. Yeah, the term they use is stroboscopic. I love that. It means our consciousness isn't a constant spotlight. It's more like a super fast strobe light, flashing on and off, capturing these tiny discrete moments called chittas. And the only reason it feels like a smooth reality is because of the sheer blistering speed of this process. It's just too fast for us to notice the gaps. So, okay, how do these mental frames even get created? Well, it all starts with understanding that our mind really has two basic modes of operation: standby and active. The easiest way to think about it is like your computer. It's either idle, just humming along, or it's actively running a program. So first up is the passive mode, or bhavanga. This is the mind's default setting. It's standby mode. It's just kind of there in the background, maintaining your life stream, like when you're in a deep, dreamless sleep. Really importantly, it's karmically neutral. But the second a sensory input arrives, a sight, a sound, anything, the mind snaps into active mode, or vithi. And this is where a thought process kicks off. This is where we process things, and crucially, where karma is generated. All right, so let's pop the hood and look at the anatomy of a thought. When that active mode kicks in, it's not some random mess. No, it follows a very specific, totally predictable, and lightning-fast sequence. It's an automatic chain reaction. Okay, so imagine a sudden sound happens nearby. Instantly, your mind adverts. It just turns its attention toward that source. Then, sense consciousness kicks in. Your ear registers the raw data, but it's not a bell or a voice yet. It's just sound waves. The mind then receives that raw data. It briefly investigates it, and finally, it determines what it is. And here's the truly wild part. This whole 5-step dance happens before you are consciously aware of a single thing. The best way to picture it is a line of dominoes. The arising of one of these mental moments mechanically and automatically causes the next one to fall, which triggers the next one, and so on in this unstoppable chain reaction. So, this is absolutely crucial to get. There is no little person inside your head, no self, directing this early part of the show. Words like investigating and determining can be a bit misleading because it sounds like a conscious choice. It's not. This is an impersonal, conditioned process. The system is just running its programming based on all your past habits. But inside that completely automatic chain reaction, there is one single, unbelievably important moment. It's a pivot point, a moment where the entire outcome of the thought is decided. This moment is called determining, or vodhapana, and it's the gateway. Seriously, think of it like that. Everything that happened before was just the passive reception of data. Everything that comes after it is your active karmic response to that data. This is the critical crossroads of an entire thought. And here it is. Here's the kicker. This single, fleeting, almost instantaneous moment, it's the only place in the entire sequence where we can actually intervene. It is the one and only point where mindfulness and training can influence whether the next dominoes fall toward a wise, skillful response or a reactive, unskillful one. So what happens right after that make or break moment? You know, what happens when the choice is made and the mind is finally set in motion? Well, this is where the real action begins. What happens next doesn't come as one single moment. It comes in a rapid-fire burst of 7. 7 moments that represent the most powerful, action-oriented phase of this entire thought process. This is called the Javana phase, which literally means running. And it makes sense, right? Because based on the decision made just a split second ago in that determining moment, the mind now runs through 7 identical flashes of active intention. And this is the karma factory. If that determining moment was guided by wisdom, then these 7 moments will be wholesome. If it was clouded by greed or anger, well, then these 7 moments will be unwholesome, and they'll leave a karmic imprint that makes you more likely to react that way in the future. Okay, I know this is a really detailed, almost microscopic model. But how does it actually apply to our lives? Because, you see, understanding this mechanism isn't just some cool academic exercise. It's literally the instruction manual for rewiring our own reactions. You know, this whole thing also explains why we aren't constantly generating karma for every single tiny thing we perceive. Our mind has a built-in filter system. If a sensory input is really intense or very great, the whole process runs its course, generating karma and probably forming a memory. But if the input is just slight, the process can just fizzle out at the determining phase. The mind basically goes, this isn't important, and no karmic trace is left behind. It's an incredibly efficient system for not getting overwhelmed. And here it is. This might be the most empowering takeaway from this entire model. What we call our personality, our tendencies, our character, our moods, it's not some fixed, solid thing we're stuck with. It is simply the recurring pattern of these karmic jhana impulses. And if it's a pattern, that means it can be changed. By doing the work at that tiny pivot point, at that determining moment, you can literally change the pattern. You can change the person. So think about it. This incredible, high-speed, almost invisible process is happening in your mind right now. Over and over and over again. A sound, a sight, a feeling arrives, and the chain reaction begins. The next domino is always about to fall. The only question is, with this new understanding, how are you going to choose to tip it?
All right, let's talk about karma. Now, most of us have a kind of pop culture idea of what it is, right? But today we're going to dig deeper, way past that, into its original, almost mechanical structure. So yeah, let's get right into it.
You probably picture karma like some kind of cosmic set of scales, balancing your good deeds against your bad ones. But according to the Abhidhamma analysis, that's not it at all. Nope. It's really less about balance and way more about a strict pecking order.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll bust the myth that karma is just simple math. Then we'll introduce this idea of a hierarchy. We'll dive deep into the 4 tiers, talk about what good karma can't do, and then we'll bring it all home to the incredible power of our everyday habits.
Okay, so first things first, karma isn't simple math. We really need to just throw out that whole idea of a celestial spreadsheet where all our good and bad deeds get tallied up. It just doesn't work that way.
And this quote from our source material just hits the nail on the head. See? There's no canceling things out. Instead, karma is this dynamic system of competing forces, and each one has a totally different weight and a different amount of power. Which brings us to a whole new way of looking at it. Karma as a hierarchy of influence. You can kind of think of it like a priority queue for a computer. You know how certain critical tasks just automatically jump to the front of the line? Well, the mind does something very similar at a very crucial moment. And the key phrase here is sorting mechanism. This isn't some god or cosmic judge making a moral decision about you. It's a mechanical, totally impersonal law that just sorts our actions, our volitions, based on how heavy they are and how recently we did them.
So, of course, that begs the ultimate question, right? With all these different forces swirling around in our minds, which one actually grabs the steering wheel at the moment of death and decides where we go next?
Well, the answer lies in the 4 tiers of this hierarchy. We're about to break down this whole priority queue, starting with the most powerful, the absolute top dog karmic forces, and working our way down to the simple fallback options.
Okay, so here are the 4 tiers. First, you've got weighty karma. That's the boss. If that's not in play, the mind looks to death-proximate karma. If that's not there, it's our habitual karma. And finally, the last resort is what's called residual karma. Let's look at each one.
So at the very top of the pyramid is weighty karma. These are actions so incredibly powerful, they just overshadow everything else. No contest. On the bad side, we're talking about heinous crimes like killing a parent, things that pretty much guarantee a rebirth in a hell realm. But on the good side, it means achieving incredibly deep states of meditation, which guarantees a rebirth in a high celestial world. Its power is absolute.
Now, for most of us, luckily, weighty karma isn't really a factor. So the system defaults down to tier 2, death-proximate karma. This is literally the thought, the memory, the feeling that is buzzing in your mind at the very instant of death. A final, peaceful memory of a kind act could lead to a great rebirth, but a final moment of anger or fear, that could lead to a really painful one. This is exactly why creating a peaceful environment for someone who is dying is seen as so important.
Okay, so what if there isn't a strong final thought? Well, then the mind just falls back on its default setting, habitual karma. And this is, well, it's us. It's the sum of our daily habits. If you spent your life practicing generosity, that's where your mind is going to naturally go. But even a small negative habit, if you repeat it thousands and thousands of times, can gain enough momentum to steer the whole ship.
And finally, if none of the top 3 really stand out, there's a kind of karmic safety net, residual karma. This is just the massive storage unit of all your past actions, from this life and from past lives, that haven't produced a result yet.
It's the ultimate fallback that just makes sure the process of cause and effect never, ever stops.
So this table just lays it all out perfectly. At the top, priority 1, with absolute dominance, you have weighty karma. Right below it, the dominant force is death proximate karma. Then you've got the default setting, our habitual karma. And at the very bottom, the fallback is residual karma. It's a really clear, logical flow, a true pecking order.
But, and this is a big but, this system has a really important limitation. And that brings us to our next section. There are some things that even the most powerful, wholesome karma just can't do.
And here it is, the crucial point. Let's say someone achieves those deep states of meditation. That's a wholesome, weighty karma, right? That powerful good deed does not cancel out or erase a heinous crime they might have committed in the past. They don't negate each other. The bad deed is still there, and its consequence is still coming.
And here's why. Think of it like this. Purification practices, they can weaken your negative habits, sure, but they can't go back in time and erase the historical fact that an action happened. And as for attaining jhana, that meditative state, it guarantees a high rebirth, but it's literally impossible to achieve in the first place if you have a heinous crime on your karmic record. The damage from that act makes the mind just too unstable to support such a pure, refined state.
So, after all this pretty complex theory, what's the big takeaway? What does this actually mean for us in our day-to-day lives? Well, this is where it all becomes incredibly real and personal.
The reality for most of us, right, is that we're living in the middle of this hierarchy. We haven't committed those absolute worst crimes, but we also probably haven't mastered the highest meditative states. And what that means is that our future, our trajectory, is largely in the hands of Tier 2, our state of mind when we die, and Tier 3, our ingrained daily moment-to-moment habits. And that leads to this just beautiful and simple conclusion, captured perfectly in this quote. Our character, who we are at our core, is really just the groove that gets worn into our mind by the thoughts and actions we repeat, day in and day out.
So, I'll just leave you with this to think about. If our habits really do have the power to steer the entire course of our future, it's probably worth asking ourselves, what grooves are you wearing into your mind today? Right now, this very moment, what trajectory are you setting for yourself?
Ever think about what it would take to actually transform your consciousness? I know, it sounds kinda out there, right? Like some big, mystical, unattainable thing. But what if it's not some sudden explosion of light? What if it's more like a process, a journey with a map you can actually follow? Well, that's exactly the map we're gonna dig into.
This quote really sets the tone for everything. See, this isn't about blind faith, not at all. It's about getting your hands dirty. It's an empirical process, just like a craftsperson at their bench. You test things, you refine your technique, you see what works for you, and you only hold on to what you can prove is genuine through your own experience. It's incredibly practical.
So let's just bust a huge myth right out of the gate. We all love those stories of a sudden, lightning bolt moment of enlightenment, right? But the reality for almost everyone is a much slower burn. It's a process of maturation, a bit like growing up. You have these distinct breakthroughs, these aha moments, and then you have to integrate them. It's not one giant leap, it's a whole series of deliberate steps.
And that leads us to the big question. Okay, if this is a gradual journey, a process of refinement, then what's the map look like? What are the landmarks? What are the obstacles? What's the final destination? That's the map we're about to unfold right now.
First things first. Before you can talk about liberation, you have to understand the prison, right? You need to know exactly what's binding you. And on this map, the prison walls, the very chains themselves, are known as the fetters.
And what's amazing is how specific this gets. We're not talking about vague philosophical ideas. The system lays out exactly 10 structural patterns, these cognitive distortions, that act as the bars on our mental cage. These are the things that keep us spinning in those same old cycles of stress and confusion. Now, these 10 fetters are broken down into two main groups. Think of the lower ones as the really obvious stuff we deal with every single day, clinging to this fixed idea of me, or the constant pull towards the next pleasant thing, or those flashes of anger. Then you have the higher fetters, and these guys are sneaky. They're way more subtle, operating under the radar, like that quiet background hum of I am, or a nagging restlessness you just can't shake. The whole journey is about breaking these chains, one by one, from the most obvious to the most hidden.
And that very first one, identity view, that's the big one.
It's the root system that all the others grow from. It's this deep, almost unconscious belief that there's a solid, permanent, independent me sitting in the driver's seat of our lives. You could say the entire path, from start to finish, is really about seeing through this one core illusion.
Okay, so we know what the chains are. The next logical question is, how do you break them? What are the bolt cutters? Well, this happens during a very specific kind of technical mental event. It's called the supramundane cognitive process, which is really just a fancy way of saying the mind takes a quick step outside of its normal, conditioned operating system.
And this process happens in a very precise 3-beat rhythm. First, you hit the threshold, where the mind just turns its attention away from the usual noise of thoughts and feelings. Then, bam, the action. It's described as a flash of lightning, a split-second moment that completely vaporizes a fetter. And here's the key. When it's gone for good. It can't grow back. And finally, you get the result. The mind gets to experience the peace and quiet that comes from dropping that heavy chain.
So we've got the how. That 3-step process is the engine. Now let's look at the what. Breaking these fetters isn't chaotic or random. It happens in 4 very clear, distinct, and permanent stages. These are the major milestones on our map to freedom.
The first big breakthrough is called becoming a stream enterer. And let me tell you, this is a game changer. The first 3 fetters are completely broken, including that big one, the identity view. Imagine what that's like. That constant, exhausting need to defend a fragile ego just starts to dissolve. At this point, the outcome is sealed. Full awakening is literally guaranteed, and some kinds of suffering just become impossible. The second stage is all about refinement. Here, 2 really powerful emotional drivers, sensual desire and ill will, aren't totally gone yet, but their grip on you is permanently weakened. What does that feel like? Well, it means way less time spent chasing cravings or stewing in resentment. The mind just becomes significantly lighter, with a lot less attachment and aversion yanking it around.
Now, at stage 3, what was just weakened before is now completely severed. A non-returner is no longer capable of generating anger or sensual craving. Just pause and think about that for a second. Imagine a life where you are no longer hijacked by reactive rage or consumed by obsessive desire. These incredibly powerful human drives are just gone.
And finally, we have the 4th stage, the arahant. This is where the last 5 most subtle fetters are broken. That deep-seated sense of I am, that background restlessness, the very root of ignorance itself, it's all extinguished. This is it, full liberation. As the texts say, the burden is finally laid down. Now this all sounds pretty profound, but, and this is a really important but, how do you know if an experience is genuine insight and not just a trick of the mind? The map includes some very clear warnings.
The real test isn't about seeing lights or feeling blissed out. No, the only reliable indicators are durable, observable changes in your behavior. So the first screening question to ask yourself is this: has that compulsive, self-centered craving actually noticeably gone down? And here's the other side of that coin. Has your capacity for knee-jerk, reactive anger been permanently reduced? Look, if you have some amazing spiritual experience on a Tuesday, but you're still flying off the handle just as easily on Wednesday, whatever you experienced, it wasn't a genuine breakthrough on this path. The proof is in the ethical transformation.
And this brings us to one of the most subtle traps on the entire journey. It's called getting caught by skandha demons. This is when you have a powerful spiritual experience, maybe deep silence or a vision of light, and you get attached to that. You think you've arrived, but really, it's just your ego finding a new, more refined spiritual thing to cling to. It's the ego colonizing a higher altitude.
So, what does arrival actually look like then? This brings us to a beautiful paradox. After all this work, the final state isn't some dramatic display of holiness. It's something much, much quieter.
I just love this. It completely reframes the whole journey. It's not about adding something new or attaining some prize. It's a process of removal. It's like a garden. It's a natural flowering that can only happen once the weeds, the fetters, have been pulled out.
This really is an alchemical process, isn't it? The whole point is to transmute the base metal, the heavy lead of our everyday confusion and ignorance, into the pure, shining gold of wisdom and clarity. It's an internal transformation that results in this quiet, stable contentment.
And that brings this whole grand map right back down to us, right here and now. The work isn't out there in the clouds, it's focused on the ground, the patient, rigorous work of removing our own obstructions, So the final question this map leaves us with is a personal one. Looking at your own mind, what weeds, what obstructions are you ready to start removing?
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into a really profound shift in consciousness from Buddhist philosophy. We're talking about a point of no return on the path to genuine inner freedom. So let's start with this ancient idea from the Upanishads. It frames freedom not as gaining something new, but as severing old bonds. So what exactly are these bonds, and what does it mean to truly cut them? You see, this journey isn't about piling on more knowledge. It's actually about seeing and then breaking the invisible chains that hold us back. In these teachings, they're called fetters. These are the mental habits that bind us to these endless cycles of stress and dissatisfaction. Okay, so this brings us to a key milestone on this path, a stage of awakening known as the Anagami, which literally translates to the non-returner. I mean, the name itself is pretty powerful, right? A non-returner is someone whose consciousness is no longer pulled back down by the gravity of the sensory world. You know, the world of crazing and aversion and confusion. It signifies a definitive, irreversible shift. Now, what's really important to get here is that this transformation isn't some big, flashy, fireworks in the sky kind of event. The source describes it as a falling away, a quiet evaporation. It's as if these heavy burdens you've been carrying just vanish, because the fuel that was keeping those fires burning has been completely used up. So, to really get what it means to be unbound, we have to look closely at the chains themselves. You know, what exactly is being broken here? Okay, so the Buddhist teachings identify 10 of these primary fetters, but for this stage, the Anagami, we're really zeroing in on 5 of them. And these are called the lower fetters because they are what specifically bind a being to the lower sensory-driven realms of existence. So you can see the path has these really clear stages. The first 3 fetters, you know, things like believing in a fixed, permanent self, those get cut at earlier points of awakening. But here's the kicker. The decisive moment for the Anagami is the total eradication of those final 2, sensual desire and ill will. And look, this distinction is absolutely critical. Earlier stages on the path are about weakening these forces, but the Anagami stage is about severing their very roots. It's not about managing your anger better. It's about the factory that produces that kind of hateful anger being completely shut down for good. Now, to be super clear here, the fetters aren't the experiences themselves, right? A beautiful sunset is not the problem. The fetter is the way our mind kind of gloms onto it, that sticky, adhesive clinging to the beauty, the craving that pops up from it. And that's why the teachings make this distinction between the fetters and the raw components of our experience, what they call the aggregates. An Anagami still feels pleasant and unpleasant sensations. They still perceive the world. The difference is that the binding quality, that compulsive, knee-jerk pull of desire and aversion, is just gone. So this whole operational shift is, well, it's profound. Which, of course, leads to the next big question. What does it actually feel like to live with a mind that works this way? I mean, this really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? We're talking about a fundamental rewiring of the human experience. So what's the actual, lived, day-to-day reality of a state like that? And the first thing to understand is this is not about willpower. It's not about gritting your teeth and suppressing your urges. For the Anagami, that coarse impulse for, say, hateful anger, it just doesn't even come up. The mechanism for generating it is broken. And that intense allure of sensory pleasure, it's seen for what it is, completely hollow. The texts compare it to trying to get nourishment from a dry bone. I mean, you can chew on it all day, but you're not getting anything out of it. And so the craving just dissolves. And it's the exact same story with anger. It's no longer this righteous, powerful force you can wield. Instead, you see it for what it is, this heavy, useless burden, like a hot coal. You just see it, recognize it's going to burn you, and you naturally just don't pick it up. Why would you? You know, this internal shift also totally transforms the relationship a person has with their own body. It moves away from that anxious identification, that I am this body, with all the fear of aging and getting sick that comes with it. And it moves towards a kind of functional, liberating care. The body just becomes this useful instrument for practice, something you care for, but without all the clinging and the fear. And for many, this culminates in this profound sense of relief, Sometimes it's even described as finally getting a cosmic joke. It's that sudden, liberating aha moment when you realize just how much life energy was completely wasted chasing these hollow pleasures and defending this fragile ego, an ego that was never really solid in the first place. So, that brings us to the final piece. Where does this incredible achievement actually fit within the full journey to liberation? Okay, so it's really important to understand that while breaking these chains is a decisive victory, this is not the final destination. The win is huge, but the journey to complete, unshakable freedom, that continues. Yeah, there are still more subtle fetters that remain. These are called the higher fetters. And we're talking about things like the subtle sense of I am, a kind of deep-seated restlessness, and the very root of ignorance itself. And those are what get addressed in the final stage of awakening, which is known as arahantship. Ultimately, the journey of the Anagami offers us this profound blueprint for what the Stoic philosopher Epictetus called self-mastery. The heaviest chains are broken. The mind is unbound from the sensory world, and it will never return. And that leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. What does it truly mean to be master of oneself?